I'm going to make a video and I'm just going to talk about being a scientist. I'm not a scientist. Okay, that's one thing that's important to note. I'm not a scientist. And I don't work in a scientific field or even close to it. I suppose they do scientific experiments, where I work, because I work at the university. But, obviously, I'm not a scientist. But the thing is that, I think that, I think about something that Maslow said. Abraham Maslow said something. And to me, Abraham Maslow, he's important to me. Look him up. For those of you who never heard of him, like I don't know what planet you've been on, but, and his name is not as big as it used to be because so many other things. But, he wrote a book called Psychology of Science, and I recommend it. It's hard to get, though, because it's not being printed anymore. And if you get copies of it, I got one that's cost me $10, which was a real bargain, because before that I was looking and looking, and every time somebody had it, it was like $95, even for the paperback. It's like it kind of become rare, and maybe even a collector's item over time. But the thing is that he criticized a lot of stuff in science because he's a psychologist, and his thing was that the rigid ways of looking at things in science, that you look at things for physics and everything else, just doesn't apply to the way the human mind works. And I agree with him, But the thing is that a lot of people look at science a certain way. Science is just totally, it has to take all of what is human out of the whole equation. Everything has to be numbers and weights and measures and precisions and this, that, and the other thing. And as humans, we're not that way, really. We don't really do. A lot of things we do are we all have biases and prejudices and preferences and, different taste in things. And all that is part of the reality, the whole reality. What Maslow wanted was something that had all the things that we think of as science, but also included everything that includes what it is to be human. And that's what I really admire about what he says. I'm not going to talk about the book. I've mentioned that book before, Psychology of Science. Read it. Get it if you can get it from the library. If you live in Chicago, there's only one copy at the Chicago Public Library. It's like an old copy. I have 2 copies of that book. So if somebody, I'm not going to say I'm going to give you a copy, but God, if you really, really, really were going to read it, I really would give it to a person. Because I really, it's a good book. He criticizes science in a way that most science now, today, science is worshipped. Science is worshipped. And so I think people would be in shock. And he made criticisms that were really good criticisms of science in relation to psychology. And it's not just criticism, science is bad. He said, he loves science. He said that, mentioned that. He's not anti-science. It's just more a matter of expanding how we think about things in science. And science has gone through changes. Science has evolved, And that's one thing that people don't think that, we may think, well, when we think of an ideal or something, we change our minds about it, but we never think about changing science itself. We don't think about changing science. And I think that sometimes you have to find different ways of thinking. Even though the scientists understand that. I think about what Richard Feynman was talking about, solving problems. If we think all the ways we thought before, we're not going to come up with solutions. You have to think of a way of thinking that no one has ever thought. That's the kind of thing that Richard Feynman said. And the kind of thing that Einstein talked about. That type of thing. That you have to really change the way you think about something. Innovations really do happen because someone comes up with a new way of thinking. Because all the old ways of thinking, everybody's still thinking them. They think it and they come up with the same things. Just different, bigger versions of it and faster versions and whatever. But there has to be something of a revolution in thinking in science. That's all I have to say. And that's my video for today. So that's all I wanted to say.